I never thought a bag of rock salt would turn into a criminal investigation. But here we are in Asheville, North Carolina, where my HOA president thought she could steal from me and get away with it. My name is Quinton Brennan, and I have been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 3 years now. I am a 42-year-old contractor who specializes in residential renovations, and I purchased my modest 2-story colonial here because the neighborhood seemed quiet and well-maintained. The HOA fees were reasonable at $200 per quarter, and the community amenities included a small park, walking trails, and standard landscaping services for common areas. I kept to myself mostly, maintained my property better than most, and never caused any problems for anyone. The trouble started in early January when an unexpected ice storm hit our area. North Carolina does not typically see severe winter weather, but this particular storm dumped freezing rain across the region for 2 straight days. The roads turned into skating rinks, and our subdivision's main entrance and common walkways became treacherous sheets of ice. Our HOA had a contract with a local landscaping company that was supposed to handle snow and ice removal, but they were completely overwhelmed with calls from all over Asheville. I watched from my kitchen window as elderly Mrs. Patterson from 3 doors down nearly fell twice trying to retrieve her mail. That settled it for me. I loaded up my truck with 4 50-pound bags of rock salt that I kept in my garage for exactly this type of situation. I am always prepared because of my line of work, and I had purchased the salt months earlier from a wholesale supplier at a significant discount. Each bag had cost me about $8, which was far cheaper than retail prices. I spent the better part of that afternoon spreading salt on the main entrance road, the sidewalks leading to the mailbox cluster, and the walking paths that residents used most frequently. My back ached by the time I finished, but I felt good knowing that people could walk safely. Several neighbors waved and thanked me as I worked, and Mr. Chen even brought me a thermos of hot coffee halfway through. The ice melted within hours where I had applied the salt. The HOA landscaping company finally showed up 2 days later when most of the emergency had passed, and they salted a few spots I had missed. Life returned to normal, or so I thought. 3 weeks later, I received my quarterly HOA statement in the mail. I was expecting the usual $200, but the bill showed $476. My hands tightened around the paper as I scanned the itemized charges. There was the standard $200 quarterly fee, and then a line item that made my blood pressure spike. Special assessment, winter storm emergency ice treatment, $276.00. I called the HOA management office immediately. A bored-sounding receptionist named Tracy answered and told me that all homeowners were being charged for the emergency ice treatment service. When I explained that I had personally provided and spread most of the salt used during the storm, she put me on hold for 7 minutes before returning to say that the HOA president, Brenda Whitmore, would need to address my concerns and that she would call me back within 48 hours. Brenda did not call me back. Instead, 4 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA stating that the special assessment was valid and that payment was due within 30 days to avoid late fees and potential lien action against my property. The letter was signed by Brenda and included absolutely no explanation or justification beyond a single sentence. All homeowners benefit from common area maintenance and are responsible for their proportionate share of costs. I am not the type of person who lets things go when I know I am right. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, which was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse. The clubhouse was a small brick building near the subdivision entrance that mostly sat empty, except for the occasional birthday party rental or these monthly meetings. When I arrived at 6:55, there were already about 15 other homeowners in the folding chairs facing a long table where the board members sat. I recognized most of the faces from around the neighborhood. Brenda Whitmore sat in the center chair, a woman in her early 50s with short blonde hair styled in that specific way that somehow communicated both suburban respectability and an eagerness to speak to managers. She wore a cream-colored blazer over a floral blouse and had reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. To her left sat Dennis Murphy, the treasurer, a soft-spoken accountant who always seemed uncomfortable during these meetings. To her right was Patricia Gorman, the secretary, who typed furiously on a laptop throughout the entire meeting. Two other board members flanked them, both nodding along to whatever Brenda said like dashboard bobbleheads. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel against a small wooden block. We went through the standard agenda items, including approval of last month's minutes, a discussion about repainting the community sign, and a complaint about someone's trash cans being visible from the street. Then came the portion of the meeting for homeowner concerns. I raised my hand and Brenda's eyes found me with what I can only describe as predatory recognition. She knew exactly why I was there. "Yes, Quinton, do you have something to share with the board?" Her voice dripped with false sweetness. I stood up and kept my voice calm and professional. I received a special assessment for $276 for winter storm ice treatment. I am contesting this charge because I personally provided and applied approximately 200 pounds of rock salt to our common areas during the ice storm. I did this because our contracted landscaping company was not available and the conditions were dangerous. I should not be charged for a service that I provided myself, using my own materials. A few homeowners murmured in agreement. I noticed several people nodding. Brenda's smile did not waver. "We appreciate your initiative during the storm, Quinton, but the HOA did incur expenses for professional ice treatment services. The landscaping company did respond and provided services, and those costs must be distributed among all homeowners." "The landscaping company came 2 days later and did minimal work," I countered. "I have photographs with timestamps showing that I had already treated all the main areas. At most, they might have spread 1 bag of salt in a few spots. There is no way the service they provided cost over $5,000, which is what you are collecting from the homeowners." I had done the math. There were 19 homes in our subdivision. If each was being charged $276, that was $5,244 total. Brenda's expression hardened. "The assessment covers not just materials, but also the emergency call-out fee, liability insurance, and administrative costs. The amount has been properly calculated and approved by the board. If you wish to formally dispute it, you may submit a written complaint, but I can tell you now that the charge will stand." "I want to see the invoice from the landscaping company," I said firmly. As a homeowner, I have the right to review HOA financial documents. Dennis, the treasurer, shifted uncomfortably in his chair and glanced at Brenda. She gave him a sharp look and then turned back to me. "You may submit a formal request in writing for financial document review. We will respond within the time frame required by our bylaws. Now, if there are no other concerns, we need to move on to other agenda items." I sat down, but I was far from finished. After the meeting, 3 other homeowners approached me in the parking lot. One was Sarah Chen, a nurse who lived with her husband on Maple Drive. Another was Tom Richardson, a retired police officer. The third was Jennifer Holmes, a teacher who had recently moved into the neighborhood. I did not want to say anything in there, but I think something weird is going on, Sarah said quietly. My husband and I have been tracking the HOA expenses for the past year because we are considering moving. The amounts never quite add up. Tom crossed his arms over his chest. I have been suspicious of Brenda for a while now. There have been at least 4 special assessments in the past 18 months, all for amounts that seem excessive. What can we do? Jennifer asked. I am new here, but $276 is a lot of money for salt that apparently one of our neighbors provided himself. I told them I would submit a formal request to review the financial documents and suggested they do the same. The more homeowners who requested information, the harder it would be for Brenda to ignore or deflect. We exchanged phone numbers and agreed to stay in touch. The next morning, I drafted a formal letter requesting copies of all invoices, receipts, and financial records related to the winter storm special assessment. I cited the specific sections of North Carolina HOA law that granted homeowners the right to inspect association records. I hand-delivered the letter to the HOA management office and got Tracy to stamp a copy as received. While I waited for the HOA's response, I decided to do some investigating on my own. I drove to the landscaping company's office on the south side of Asheville. Green Meadows Landscaping operated out of a small building with a yard full of equipment and supplies. I walked into the office and found a woman in her 30s working at a desk surrounded by invoices and work orders. "Can I help you?" she asked with a friendly smile. "I hope so." "My name is Quinton Brennan, and I live in Meadowbrook Estates. Your company provides our HOA landscaping services. I am trying to get some information about the emergency ice treatment service you provided in January." Her brow furrowed. "Meadowbrook Estates, let me pull up that account." She typed on her computer for a moment. "Okay, yes, we have a standard contract for mowing and seasonal maintenance. In January, we did respond to an emergency call for ice treatment on January 8th. What did that service cost?" I asked. She clicked through a few screens. The invoice was for $350. That included the emergency call-out fee of $100, 2 bags of ice melt at $40 each, and labor costs for about 90 minutes of work. The invoice was paid by check on January 15th. My jaw clenched. $350. The HOA had collected $5,244 from homeowners and paid the landscaping company $350. Where did the other $4,894 go? "Would you be able to provide me with a copy of that invoice?" I asked. She hesitated. "I would need to check with my manager. Can I ask why you need it?" I explained the situation, including the fact that I had provided most of the salt myself and was now being charged $276 for a service that barely happened. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "That does not sound right at all." "Hold on, let me get my manager." A few minutes later, a man in his 50s emerged from a back office. He introduced himself as Dale Morrison, the owner of Green Meadows Landscaping. I explained everything again, and his face grew progressively redder as I spoke. "I have had problems with Brenda Whitmore before," he said bluntly. "She is always trying to nickel and dime me on invoices and then turns around and does stuff like this. I will print you a copy of the invoice right now. If she is inflating costs and blaming it on my company, I want that documented." He printed 2 copies, gave me one, and kept one for his files. I thanked him profusely and left with a crucial piece of evidence in hand. That afternoon, I made copies of the invoice and delivered them to Sarah, Tom, and Jennifer. I also sent a text to the group explaining what I had found. Sarah responded within minutes. "This is fraud. We need to report this." Tom called me directly. "I still have contacts in local law enforcement. This is definitely something that could be prosecuted, but you need to have your ducks in a row. Document everything." I spent the next week doing exactly that. I photographed my remaining bags of salt with receipts showing my purchase date and costs. I printed my time-stamped photos from the day I salted the common areas. I compiled every email, letter, and document related to the special assessment. I also reached out to other homeowners and discovered that several had similar concerns about previous special assessments. One homeowner, Marcus Webb, told me about a special assessment from 6 months earlier for emergency tree removal after a summer storm. The HOA had charged everyone $190, claiming a large oak tree in the common area had to be removed by a professional service. Marcus had spoken to the tree service company directly and learned they had only charged the HOA $800 for the work, meaning the HOA had collected $3,610, but only spent $800. Another homeowner, Lisa Thornton, described a special assessment for playground equipment repairs that seemed similarly inflated. The pattern was becoming clear and deeply disturbing. On day 14 after my request, I received a response from the HOA. It was a letter from Brenda stating that my request for financial documents was overly broad and burdensome, and that I would need to schedule an appointment to review documents in person at the management office during business hours. Furthermore, the letter stated that I could only review documents for 1 hour and could not make copies or take photographs. This was a clear violation of North Carolina HOA law, which required associations to provide reasonable access to records and allowed homeowners to obtain copies. Brenda was stalling and obstructing, which told me she had something to hide. I forwarded the letter to Tom Richardson, who suggested we consult with an attorney who specialized in HOA law. Tom knew someone from his police days who had retired and become a real estate attorney. Her name was Margaret Phillips, and her office was in downtown Asheville. I made an appointment and met with Margaret 2 days later. She was a sharp woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. I laid out the entire situation, provided all my documentation, and showed her the landscaping company invoice. Margaret reviewed everything methodically, making notes on a legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at me with a grim expression. "Mr. Brennan, what you have described is embezzlement. Your HOA president has been systematically defrauding homeowners by inflating special assessments and pocketing the difference. Based on what you have told me, this has been going on for at least 18 months, possibly longer. The amounts involved likely exceed $10,000, which makes this a felony in North Carolina." My stomach dropped even though I had suspected as much. Hearing it confirmed by an attorney made it real in a way it had not been before. "What do I do?" I asked. "First, I am going to draft a demand letter to the HOA requiring them to provide full financial documentation within 5 business days or face legal action. Second, I strongly recommend you file a report with the Asheville Police Department. This is criminal fraud, not just an HOA dispute. Third, we should organize the other homeowners who have concerns and potentially file a class action lawsuit to recover the stolen funds." I authorized Margaret to send the demand letter and left her office feeling both vindicated and angry. This was so much bigger than my $276. That evening, I called an emergency meeting of concerned homeowners at my house. 9 people showed up, including Sarah, Tom, Jennifer, Marcus, and Lisa. I explained what my attorney had said and showed them the landscaping invoice. "I cannot believe she thought she would get away with this," Jennifer said, shaking her head. "People like Brenda think they are untouchable," Tom said. "She probably figured no one would bother to investigate, and even if someone did, she could intimidate them into backing down." "So what do we do now?" Marcus asked. I told them about Margaret's recommendations. "I am going to file a police report tomorrow. My attorney is sending a demand letter. If any of you want to join in a potential lawsuit to recover the stolen money, Margaret can represent all of us." Everyone in the room agreed to participate. Sarah volunteered to create a spreadsheet documenting all the suspicious special assessments we could identify. Tom said he would make some calls to his contacts in law enforcement to ensure the report was taken seriously. The next morning, I went to the Asheville Police Department and asked to file a report for fraud and embezzlement. The officer at the front desk directed me to the detective division, where I met with Detective Raymond Hughes, a methodical man in his mid-40s who listened carefully as I explained the situation. "You have documentation?" he asked. I handed him a folder containing copies of everything: the special assessment notices, the landscaping company invoice, my receipts and photos, and Margaret's summary of the legal issues. Detective Hughes reviewed it all with growing interest. "This is pretty straightforward," he said. "If what you are saying is accurate and this invoice supports it, then your HOA president has been stealing from homeowners. I will need to verify some things and probably get a warrant to seize the HOA financial records, but this is definitely something we can prosecute." "How long will it take?" I asked. "Hard to say. Financial crimes take time to investigate properly. We need to trace where the money went, document the pattern of fraud, and build a solid case. I would estimate at least a few weeks, possibly a couple of months. In the meantime, do not confront the HOA president directly. We do not want to tip her off and give her a chance to destroy evidence or move money around. I promise to stay quiet and let the investigation proceed." Detective Hughes said he would be in touch as things developed. Margaret's demand letter arrived at the HOA management office 2 days later via certified mail. I knew this because Tracy from the office called me in a panic. "Quinton, what is going on? We just received a letter from an attorney demanding all these financial records and threatening legal action." "Brenda is furious. I have the right to review HOA financial documents," I said calmly. "Your office and Brenda have been obstructing that right. My attorney is simply ensuring that the HOA complies with North Carolina law." "This is going to cause so many problems," Tracy moaned. "The problems already exist," I said. "I am just bringing them to light." That evening, Brenda called me directly. Her voice was tight with barely controlled rage. "Quinton, this little stunt of yours is completely unnecessary. You are disrupting the entire HOA over a routine special assessment. If you withdraw your attorney's demand and pay your bill, we can forget this ever happened." "I am not withdrawing anything," I said. "I want to see the financial records I am legally entitled to review. If the special assessment is legitimate, the records will show that. If they are not legitimate, then we have a much bigger problem." "You are making a huge mistake," Brenda hissed. "I have been managing this HOA for 5 years, and I do not appreciate some contractor questioning my integrity." "Then you should have nothing to hide," I replied evenly. "Produce the financial records." She hung up on me. I was not surprised. 3 days later, Margaret received a response from the HOA's attorney, a man named Charles Pemberton who worked for a firm that specialized in HOA representation. His letter stated that the HOA would provide financial records for inspection at the management office, but would not provide copies without a court order. This was still not compliant with the law, but it was a slight improvement. Margaret advised me to go ahead and schedule the inspection, while she filed a motion in court to compel the HOA to provide copies. She also informed me that she had been contacted by Detective Hughes, who had requested copies of all the documentation I had provided to her. "The police investigation is moving forward," Margaret said. "That is good news. Once they execute a search warrant and seize the financial records, we will have access to everything we need." I felt like things were finally progressing, but I also felt anxious. Brenda was clearly panicking, and desperate people do unpredictable things. The following Tuesday, I received a notice from the HOA stating that I was being fined $500 for unauthorized modification of common areas, because I had spread salt without HOA approval. The notice was dated and signed by Brenda and stated that I had 30 days to pay or face additional penalties. I called Margaret immediately and read her the notice. She actually laughed. "This is retaliation, plain and simple. She is trying to intimidate you into dropping your complaint. Do not pay it. In fact, save this notice because it is evidence of her retaliatory conduct, which is illegal under North Carolina law. She is digging herself a deeper hole." 2 days after that, I came home from a job site to find a tow truck in my driveway preparing to hook up my truck. I ran over and shouted at the driver to stop. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded. The driver, a young guy in grease-stained coveralls, looked confused. "I got a call from the HOA saying this truck was abandoned and needed to be towed. I have the work order right here." He showed me a work order on his clipboard. It was on HOA letterhead and authorized the removal of my truck for being inoperable and in violation of community standards. My truck was neither abandoned nor inoperable. It was a 2-year-old Ford F-150 that I used daily for work. "This is fraudulent," I said. "My truck is not abandoned. I live here. This is my driveway." The driver held up his hands. "Look, man, I do not want any trouble. If you say it is your truck and you live here, I am not going to tow it, but you need to take this up with whoever called it in." He unhooked the equipment and left. I immediately photographed the work order and called Margaret. She was furious. "This is harassment and possibly filing a false police report, depending on how the tow was authorized. Document everything. I am going to file an emergency motion for a restraining order against Brenda Whitmore to stop this harassment." I also called Detective Hughes and reported the towing incident. He sounded intrigued. "She is feeling the pressure. People who are guilty tend to escalate their behavior when they feel cornered. Keep documenting everything and stay safe. We are very close to executing the search warrant." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what else Brenda might do. The next morning, I installed security cameras around my property, including one facing the street and one covering my driveway. 2 days later, the search warrant was executed. I heard about it from Sarah Chen, who texted me at 10 in the morning. "Police at HOA office with a warrant." Brenda being escorted out in handcuffs. I drove to the management office and parked across the street. 2 police cruisers were in the parking lot, along with an unmarked sedan that I assumed belonged to Detective Hughes. Through the office windows, I could see officers carrying boxes of documents. Brenda was standing next to one of the cruisers, her hands cuffed behind her back, her face red and furious. Detective Hughes emerged from the office carrying a laptop. He spotted me across the street and gave me a subtle nod. I stayed in my truck and watched as they loaded Brenda into the cruiser and drove away. The whole thing took about 40 minutes. My phone rang. It was Margaret. "I just heard from Detective Hughes. They found evidence of systematic embezzlement going back 3 years. Brenda has been creating fake invoices, inflating actual invoices, and depositing the difference into a personal account. The amounts total over $37,000. I felt a mix of vindication and disgust. $37,000 stolen from homeowners who trusted her to manage their community. What happens now? I asked. The criminal case moves forward. Brenda will be arraigned, and she will likely face multiple felony charges. On the civil side, we can now file our lawsuit to recover the stolen funds plus damages. With the criminal evidence, this should be a straightforward case. Over the next few weeks, the details emerged. Brenda had been arrested and charged with felony embezzlement, fraud, and forgery. The forgery charges related to the fake invoices she had created from non-existent companies. Her bail was set at $50,000, which she posted through a bondsman. The local news picked up the story, and suddenly our quiet subdivision in Asheville was getting media attention. A reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times interviewed me and several other homeowners. The story ran on the front page of the local section with the headline, "HOA President Charged with Embezzling Thousands from Homeowners." The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Brenda as president. Dennis Murphy, the treasurer, resigned out of shame for not catching the fraud earlier, even though the evidence showed Brenda had been very careful to hide her activities from the other board members. Patricia Gorman became interim president, and the board hired a new management company to take over from Tracy's office, which had been complicit through negligence if not intent. Margaret filed our civil lawsuit on behalf of 14 homeowners seeking recovery of the embezzled funds plus interest, attorney fees, and damages for harassment and emotional distress. My portion included my $276 special assessment, the $500 retaliatory fine, and damages related to the attempted towing of my truck. The criminal trial was scheduled for late May. In North Carolina, financial crimes of this magnitude typically move through the system relatively quickly, especially with such clear evidence. The prosecution had Brenda's bank records showing deposits that matched the timing and amounts of the special assessments, the actual invoices from vendors showing the real costs, and testimony from the landscaping company and other vendors about the fraudulent inflation of invoices. In April, Brenda's attorney approached the prosecution with a plea deal. She would plead guilty to felony embezzlement and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. The prosecution agreed, contingent on Brenda paying full restitution to the affected homeowners. The plea hearing was held on April 23rd. I attended along with Sarah, Tom, Jennifer, Marcus, Lisa, and several other homeowners. We sat in the gallery and watched as Brenda, looking much smaller and older than she had in those HOA meetings, stood before the judge and admitted her guilt. "Miss Whitmore, you are pleading guilty to felony embezzlement in the amount of $37,000 and fraud. Do you understand these charges?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor." Brenda's voice was barely audible. "And you admit that you systematically defrauded the homeowners of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, by inflating and creating false special assessments and depositing the excess funds into your personal account?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge reviewed the plea agreement and sentencing recommendation. The prosecution recommended 3 years in prison with credit for time served and strict probation terms, plus full restitution. The judge would make the final sentencing decision at a hearing scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, our civil lawsuit moved forward. Brenda's homeowner's insurance did not cover intentional criminal acts, so she was personally liable for the stolen funds plus damages. Her attorney tried to argue that the restitution in the criminal case should satisfy the civil claims, but Margaret successfully argued that we were entitled to additional damages for harassment, emotional distress, and attorney fees. In early June, we reached a settlement. Brenda agreed to pay back the $37,000 in embezzled funds, plus an additional $23,000 in damages and attorney fees, for a total of $60,000. She would have to sell her house in Meadowbrook Estates to pay it, which seemed fitting to me. She had stolen from the community and could no longer be part of it. The criminal sentencing hearing was held on June 10th. I attended this one too. The judge heard victim impact statements from several homeowners, including me. When it was my turn, I stood and faced the judge. "Your Honor, I am a contractor and a homeowner. I work hard for my money, and I maintain my property and contribute to my community. When I saw people struggling during that ice storm, I used my own supplies and my own labor to help them, expecting nothing in return. To then be billed for salt that I provided myself, and to discover that the person billing me was stealing from everyone, was deeply violating. Brenda Whitmore betrayed the trust of an entire community. She looked us in the eye at meetings, accepted our dues, and robbed us blind. I hope the court will send a message that this behavior has serious consequences." The judge listened to all the statements and then addressed Brenda directly. "Miss Whitmore, you held a position of trust in your community. People elected you to manage their HOA in good faith, believing you would act in their best interests. Instead, you exploited that trust for personal gain. You stole from your neighbors, people who lived alongside you and trusted you. When one homeowner began asking questions, rather than taking responsibility, you retaliated and harassed him. This behavior is reprehensible. I am sentencing you to 3 years in the North Carolina Department of Corrections, with 18 months to be served, and the remainder suspended pending successful completion of probation. You will also complete 200 hours of community service and are ordered to pay full restitution as outlined in the civil settlement. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." Brenda was crying now, which was the first emotion I had seen from her besides anger. She was taken into custody that day to begin serving her sentence. I walked out of the courthouse feeling like justice had finally been served, though the whole process had taken nearly 6 months from start to finish. Back at Meadowbrook Estates, life slowly returned to normal. The new management company conducted a full audit of the HOA finances and implemented better oversight procedures. Patricia Gorman proved to be a fair and transparent president. She instituted quarterly financial reports that were distributed to all homeowners and encouraged people to ask questions. The board also passed a resolution thanking me for bringing the fraud to light and officially waiving the bogus $276 special assessment and $500 fine that Brenda had tried to impose. They even reimbursed me for the cost of the rock salt I had provided during the ice storm, which I had not asked for but appreciated nonetheless. In July, I received a check for my portion of the civil settlement, which totaled just over $4,000 after attorney fees were distributed. It covered my special assessment, the retaliatory fine, my actual costs for salt and time, and a portion of the damages. The other homeowners received similar amounts based on what they had been overcharged during Brenda's tenure. Sarah Chen organized a community barbecue in August to celebrate putting the whole mess behind us. Most of the neighborhood showed up, and there was a lightness in the air that had not been there in months. People were actually talking to each other, sharing stories, and acting like a real community instead of just people who happen to live near each other. Tom Richardson pulled me aside during the barbecue and handed me a beer. "You know, you could have just paid that special assessment and moved on. Most people would have. But you did not, and because of that, you stopped a thief and got justice for a lot of people. That takes guts." I shrugged. I just could not let it go. It was not about the money, it was about what was right. "That is exactly why it mattered," Tom said. As summer turned to fall, I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. It had started with something so small and seemingly petty. A $276 charge for salt that I had provided myself. But that one small thread, when pulled, had unraveled an entire tapestry of fraud and corruption. I learned a lot about HOA law, criminal prosecution, and civil litigation. I learned that standing up for yourself matters, even when it is difficult and uncomfortable. I learned that communities are only as strong as the people willing to fight for them. And I learned that sometimes the smallest acts of integrity, like spending an afternoon spreading salt to help your neighbors, can lead to uncovering the biggest betrayals. In October, I ran into Patricia Gorman at the grocery store. She told me the HOA had received notification that Brenda was being released early to a work release program after serving 10 months of her sentence, contingent on her maintaining employment and continuing to make restitution payments. She had sold her house for enough to cover the entire $60,000 settlement, and the funds had been distributed to all the affected homeowners. "None of this would have happened without you," Patricia said. "You could have just complained and given up when Brenda stonewalled you, but you did not. You followed through. Thank you." I told her I was just glad it was over and that the HOA was in good hands now. She smiled and said the board wanted to put a plaque in the community clubhouse, acknowledging the importance of homeowner vigilance and transparency in HOA governance. I asked her not to put my name on it, which made her laugh, but I was serious. I had not done any of this for recognition. By November, life in Meadowbrook Estates had fully returned to normal. The neighborhood looked great going into the holidays. The new management company had used the embezzled funds, now recovered, to make some actual improvements to the common areas, including new lighting on the walking paths and fresh mulch in all the landscaping beds. When the first winter storm hit in December, the landscaping company responded immediately and did a thorough job with the ice treatment. I kept my rock salt in my garage this time, just in case, but it was not needed. The HOA actually functioned the way it was supposed to. I thought about Brenda sometimes, serving out her sentence in work release, and wondered if she understood the magnitude of what she had done. She had not just stolen money. She had stolen trust, security, and peace of mind from people who considered themselves her neighbors. That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than financial loss. But I also thought about the community that had come together when the truth emerged. Sarah creating her spreadsheet of suspicious charges. Tom using his connections to help move the investigation forward. Jennifer supporting the effort even though she was new to the neighborhood. Marcus and Lisa sharing their stories of previous overcharges. All of us standing together in that courtroom for the victim impact statements. That solidarity meant something. It proved that ordinary people could hold powerful people accountable when they worked together. In early January, almost exactly 1 year after the ice storm that started everything, I was contacted by a reporter working on a follow-up story about HOA fraud in North Carolina. She wanted to interview me about my experience and what advice I would give to other homeowners who suspect financial misconduct in their HOAs. I agreed to the interview, and we met at a coffee shop in downtown Asheville. She was a young journalist named Rebecca who worked for a statewide news organization. She had done extensive research on HOA fraud cases and said mine was one of the most clear-cut examples she had found. "What made you decide to pursue this when you could have just paid the assessment?" she asked. "It was not right," I said simply. I knew I had provided that salt myself. I had receipts, photographs, timestamps. The evidence was clear. And when I started digging, I realized it was not just about my salt. It was about a pattern of theft that was hurting everyone in my community. Once I understood that, I could not walk away. "What advice would you give to other homeowners in similar situations?" I thought about it carefully before responding. "First, document everything. Keep receipts, take photos, save emails and letters. Evidence is crucial. Second, know your rights." In North Carolina and most states, homeowners have the legal right to inspect HOA financial records. If your HOA is obstructing that right, that is a red flag. Third, find allies. I could not have done this alone. Other homeowners who had similar concerns helped build the case. Fourth, do not be afraid to involve professionals. Getting an attorney and filing a police report were critical steps. And finally, be persistent. People like Brenda count on homeowners giving up when things get difficult. Do not give them that satisfaction. The article was published a week later with the headline, "Homeowners' Persistence Uncovers Massive HOA Fraud in Asheville." It featured my story along with interviews from Margaret Phillips about HOA law and Detective Hughes about investigating financial crimes in HOAs. The article generated significant attention and apparently led to several other homeowners around the state reviewing their own HOA finances more carefully. Margaret called me after the article came out and said she had received inquiries from 3 different HOAs about potential financial irregularities. "You started something," she said. "People are waking up to the fact that HOA boards need oversight." I was glad to hear it. If my experience could help even one other homeowner avoid being victimized by a corrupt HOA board, then all the stress and effort had been worth it. As January turned to February, I found myself back where I had started a year earlier, just a contractor living in a quiet subdivision in Asheville. But I was different now. I understood the power of speaking up, of refusing to accept something unjust just because it was easier to go along. I understood that ordinary people have more power than they realize when they are willing to use it. One cold February afternoon, I was loading supplies into my truck when Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor I had watched struggling on the ice a year earlier, walked over with a plate of cookies. "I made these for you," she said. "I never properly thanked you for salting the sidewalks during that storm last year, and for everything that came after. You did a good thing, Quinton." I accepted the cookies with genuine gratitude. I just did what anyone should have done. "But most people would not have," she said wisely. "That is what makes it special." After she left, I sat in my truck eating a cookie and thinking about the journey from that ice storm to this moment. It had started with 4 bags of rock salt and a stubborn refusal to be cheated. It had grown into a criminal investigation, a lawsuit, and a community coming together for justice. And it had ended with accountability, restitution, and a stronger, more transparent HOA. I thought about the invoice that had started it all. The one from Green Meadows Landscaping showing they had only charged $350, while the HOA collected $5,244 from homeowners. That single document had been the key that unlocked everything else. It proved the fraud in black and white terms that could not be denied or explained away. I thought about Brenda in work release, living with the consequences of her choices. I hoped she was learning something from the experience, though I suspected people like her rarely gained true insight into their own behavior. She had seen homeowners as marks to be exploited rather than neighbors to be served. That fundamental corruption of values was not easily fixed. But mostly I thought about my community and the resilience people showed when faced with betrayal. We could have turned on each other, become suspicious, and divided. Instead, we came together. We supported each other through the investigation and prosecution. We showed up at court hearings to stand as witnesses to the harm that had been done. We rebuilt trust through transparency and accountability. That evening, I attended the February HOA meeting. It was much better attended than meetings during Brenda's tenure, with at least 25 homeowners present. Patricia ran the meeting efficiently and welcomed questions. Dennis had been replaced as treasurer by Marcus Webb, who presented a detailed financial report that included every expense down to the penny. There were no special assessments, no surprise charges, no inflated invoices. During the homeowner comment period, Sarah Chen stood up and proposed that the HOA adopt a policy requiring board approval from at least 3 members for any special assessment over $100, with full documentation provided to homeowners within 10 days. The motion passed unanimously. It was a small thing, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the HOA operated. Transparency and accountability were now the foundation, not afterthoughts. Brenda's theft had been terrible, but it had also created an opportunity to build something better. As I drove home that night, I passed the community entrance where I had spread salt during the ice storm. The sign looked freshly painted, and the landscaping was neat and well maintained. It looked like a community that cared about itself, which was exactly what it should be. I pulled into my driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. A year ago, I had been angry about being billed for salt I had provided myself. Now, I felt something closer to peace. Justice had been served, the community was stronger, and I had learned that standing up for what was right, even in small things, could lead to profound change. Inside my garage, I still had those remaining bags of rock salt, just in case another storm hit. But now, they represented more than just ice treatment supplies. They were a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of community service can reveal the biggest truths, and that one person refusing to accept injustice can make a real difference. I never expected that catching my HOA billing me for salt I had provided from my own supply would lead to a criminal investigation and the exposure of massive fraud. But that is exactly what happened, and I would not change a thing. Because in the end, it was not about the salt or the money. It was about integrity, accountability, and the willingness to fight for what was right even when it was difficult. As I settled in for the evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom Richardson. It was a photo of the new financial transparency policy posted in the clubhouse with a simple message. "Thank you for having the guts to start this fight." I smiled and texted back, "Thank you for helping me finish it." That was the truth of it. None of this had been accomplished alone. It had taken a community working together to hold a thief accountable and rebuild trust. My role had simply been to pull that first thread when I noticed something was wrong. Everything that followed was the result of good people refusing to accept corruption in their community. The ice storm had passed, Brenda had been held accountable, and Meadowbrook Estates had emerged stronger and more unified. Sometimes the smallest injustices lead to the biggest reckonings, and sometimes a few bags of rock salt can change everything. I had learned that lesson the hard way, but I had learned it well. And I knew that if I ever faced a similar situation again, I would make exactly the same choice. To stand up, speak out, and refuse to accept wrongdoing, no matter how small it seemed at first. Because that is what integrity demands, and that is what community deserves.